It's bigger. It's louder. It's better than ever. This still isn't your typical motorsports podcast. This is the 10th anniversary of Crush This, a monster truck podcast brought to you by J Concepts. For 10 years, your hosts, the monster truck Canucker Bradshaw and Dan Chichagash, have brought you into the minds and personalities of the monster truck industry. Strap in and hold on tight. This is Crush This!
Welcome, everybody, to a brand new episode of Crush This, a monster truck podcast. My name is Bradshaw, and guys, this episode is our tribute to the one and only Dan the Man Runte. And we'll get into it. We have our special guest, Kyle Doyle, is going to be joining us. We have some video tributes as well. But it dawned on me right before, getting set up for the podcast that today is the day that Dan Runte in 2012 did the distance record in the Indianapolis Jamboree in 2012 today exactly. So what a night to honor one of the best to ever do it. And we are just going to get into it here, guys. We're going to play a little tribute that Colby Marshall did for Dan at the Monster Truck Hall of Fame. We're going to play that video. It's about 2 minutes and 15 seconds. And then we'll bring Cheech is here as well. He is at the Oklahoma State Fair. He's taking some time out of doing ride truck stuff to hang out with us. But we're going to play this video that Colby put together for Dan when Dan got inducted to the Hall of Fame. And we will get into tonight's episode. Guys, make sure you grab yourself a drink. RC and Captain Morgan, if you have the chance. I got whiskey and Diet Pepsi. So here we go, everybody. A huge thank you goes out to Colby Marshall for putting that video together. But we have former Bigfoot driver, podcast host, owner of OSMT, Mr. Kyle Doyle here with us. Kyle, how's it going, buddy?
Hanging in there this evening, Brad. Good to see you both.
It's definitely awesome to have you joining us with this episode.
Before we
go ahead, Dan.
Before we do, we gotta thank our sponsors, Brad.
Yes.
We gotta thank our sponsors. We gotta thank the people that back this podcast up. MTA, Well, he was a huge fan. Steve wanted to post a video, but he wanted to let me know, told me about what's going on. That Dan Runte was his Bigfoot truck. I think it was 15 or 16. It had the Blue Summit Racing scheme on it, not the white one, but it was around his local area. And he allowed him to sit inside the truck, take a picture, and also he was the first one to let him get his hands dirty on tiring down the truck and helping out and stuff like that. And Steve had he didn't know what to say in the video, and as in like there's so much information, so much stuff going on that he just wanted me to tell the story about how Dan was the first one to kind of open the door and stuff like that with him doing that. Once again, Tuesday night Smashdown, Thursday night Thunder. For people that don't know, it's downhill die-cast racing. So, for example, Kyle, if you sign up to the league, they will supply you with, like a Firestone Bigfoot or like something like that, and then you just, put your name in the hat and hope for the best, kind of like a die-cast Pinewood Derby, pretty much. But
This seems to be working
just
out
go
better
check
than
that out.
uphill diecast racing, right?
Yes. Uphill's terrible. It was a flash in the pan. Downhill, it's been going on pretty good. But yeah. But outside that, go there, check it out. Facebook, YouTube. And also another person that is a really big Bigfoot fan and probably would tell a lot of good stories of him as being a fan and stuff like that is Jason Rona. Him and Fred, they put together the Bigfoot 4 truck with Lonnie and Jason and all them helping out. Go to jconcepts.net and go purchase some cool RC stuff, bodies, tires, you name it. Go type in "crush this" to get 15% off on entering the door. And once again, like Brad said, Colby Marshall, MTRC, some realistic theme monster truck stuff with the RC world. Once again, thank you. And then also want to thank Nick Davis and Back Channel Productions. He's busy over in Missouri doing some mud racing videos and stuff, or he was going to help us out with another video too. Once again, and then in this episode too, will be on audio, Spotify, iTunes. If you guys want to take a photo, screenshot, let us know. Thank you for the 5-star like and reviews. And also, if you don't have those platforms, it will be later on monstersmonthly.com, and that will be on there too for your insights, some monster truck coverage, and listening to the podcast. So we'll be on the platform too. So go take a look at that also. But once again, I had to let them know before we get too deep in the rabbit hole and forget about them. So I didn't want to do that. But outside of that, back to the program.
Yeah. Thank you, Cheech, for getting the sponsor plugs there. I've just got back on medication, so my brain's still trying to get used to everything. So thank you for catching that. But this episode we wanted to do last week, but we wanted to give it time to do this properly. Dan Runte has impacted our lives in different ways. I never got the chance to see him perform live or meet the man in person, but the impact he had on very young Bradley, watching Trucks and Tractor Power, the Pin to Point series, the impact that man had on my life, it's up there for me. He was, for me, my second favorite race car driver, next to John Force. And, I still don't want to believe that it's real, but it is. And I'm already starting to feel the emotion just talking about it. But, let's just talk a little bit about Kyle, you probably know a little bit more about how Dan got into working at Bigfoot and that kind of, how did that start, that process happened? Are you there, Kyle? Oh, you're there.
I think I'm back. I had to shovel another wheelbarrow of internets into the fire here in Wyoming.
have a good little laugh. But
Did you
with
hear
that,
what I? Did you hear how,
I had one story to talk about while he's doing that. Is that all
Yeah.
right, Brad?
Yeah, go ahead, Cheech.
I have to say, Dan was the first guy that actually called me back in 2013 to set up a job interview for working at Bigfoot before me going to Monster Jam, and Hall Brothers Racing and stuff like that. And I was greener than green. I was a fan. I was working as a track crew guy for Monster Jam, and I just got out of my Tinder with about to graduate in 2014 at a technical school. I started making resumes and stuff like that. And I just started sending out to monster truck teams throughout the area. And I still have the resumes from Team Bigfoot. And I'll even when the first, actually, I tried to apply my first time with Hall Brothers. Just want to let you know, I'm right now done with my kind of shift. I got the other guys right now running the ride truck. They're doing a pretty good job. And so that gives me time to do this obligation because we take turns throughout the day doing our thing. So doing the running the ladder and running the ride truck, and it's three of us, but we're taking turns and doing all that stuff. Well, I did my kind of like shift type deal, but anyway, I get a phone call from Dan, and he's like, "Yeah, I don't want a job interview. We're gonna do a job interview and stuff like that." And I was like, "Okay, that's cool." And it said, "Be at Bloomsburg at this time, this time, this time, and we'll see you." I was like, "Okay." And I get at the trailer at the time that I need to be, and well, it never happened. As in, uh, Brian Berlani told me that they hired another guy, but Dan was cool enough to still talk to me, and say this is looking through the truck, and went through every single thing about the truck itself, and I always had that experience. Outside of that, he was always cool to talk to, always joked around. I remember there's a vending machine at the Bigfoot shop, and it shows like Pepsi, Diet Pepsi, Mountain Dew, root beer, Pepsi, water. And there was two Pepsi tags, and I was like, "Why is there two Pepsi tags?" Well, they're like, "That's not Pepsi on the other one," and I was like, "Oh, I hit it, and here goes a Bud Light." I was like, "Oh, that's pretty cool," but they just joke around and kid around and everything like that. But that for me, that's my kind of time with Dan. He was very approachable. He talked to you like he knew you for 20 years, and he just loved monster trucks in general. But Brad, I guess if you want to tell, I can't see any of the little comments. So,
Yeah, we
but
have
yeah,
your dad's in the chat. We have a couple other people, but Kyle, how do you know much of Dan's beginning at Bigfoot, like how he kind of got started there?
We covered a little of that in our show last week, and I was careful to not. I hope I was careful enough to not, speak too authoritatively on it, because I mean, some of that stuff's fallen out of my memory, and I never got maybe like Dan to sit down and give me a full biography, which at the time when you're working with somebody like that, you don't bug them that way, I guess. But I believe he came to the Bigfoot organization kind of, about the same time that Dan Dubes did. And y'all might remember Dan Dubes was, a 4-wheel drive puller out of the Freeport, Illinois area. And I believe I think it was even Timmy that told me that he had like a service shop or something like that up there. And, Dan kind of came with him to Bigfoot and, started off his journey as a crew guy there in the late 80s. And, obviously progressed up into driving, in the 90s. And was that okay? That was Cheech.
I think his phone might have overheated or died. So
Oklahoma having their own internet problems.
So I think
Wyoming.
I was and we'll get back to your story, but I found a picture of Dan from the late 80s. I was on Discord. Look at this, even though it's blurry, look at the style.
Yeah.
Like
Somehow he looks like a cop and like he's ready to party at the same time.
Oh, Dan's back. I found some pictures on Discord of early Runte, so I had to bring this one up while we were talking about the late 80s.
Nice.
I love it.
Sorry about that. That was weird.
Happens to the best of us. I think that was at the '89 family reunion at the Indy Jamboree. That kind of looked like, with the trucks in the background stuff. So yeah, I mean, Dan worked his way. That was the old school way at Bigfoot. I can't claim to know, how things have worked over the last 15 years or whatever there. But I know that, there was a ladder system mainly there back in the day, and you worked your way up as a crew guy, mechanic, whatever, and then progressed into driving, some of the older trucks and had to work your way up into the newer ones. And that's just what he did, So if you look at the OSMT tribute video to Dan, through the Michigan Monster Trucks back channels, we were gifted a VHS tape a long time ago that had a show from Michigan, and Dan was the Bigfoot truck at that show, driving number 2, driving that sucker, way harder than I think anybody designed it for, anticipated it ever being driven, and against the likes of a lot, more competitive, let's say, newer leaf spring trucks. And that flash of greatness right there, which that show was the same weekend as the Nashville Bigfoot Bash at Nashville Fairground Speedway in 1990. So that's why Bigfoot 2 is the only truck not there, is because Dan was cutting his teeth, up in Michigan on his own, that same weekend, those same nights. So he picked a tough way to get into the business. I mean, you start at the top, you think, working for a team like Bigfoot, and certainly they were the top in a lot of ways, but then you also consider for a moment the pressure that's put on a young guy like that straight out of the gate to have that name on his shirt for his first gig in monster trucks, and ultimately what would be his only gig in monster trucks representing Bigfoot, and then to have to go out and carry the Bigfoot name in 1990 with Bigfoot 2, that's not a small task right there.
Absolutely not. And especially around that time when you have Bigfoot 8, Bigfoot 9, the newer tube frame trucks are coming out. He's trying to make his name in one of the heavier trucks that they had back in the day, and another cool picture. Somebody says this is Bigfoot 6, but there's another picture of young Runte, either parking the truck or doing something. But it's crazy to think with him, with how he began, the kind of driver that he'd become. And you said there too, Kyle, like sticking with one team his whole career. That is a rarity you don't see much in this day and age. You see so many people jumping from team to team, but he was just big. He should have had Bigfoot tattooed somewhere on him because he was a lifer.
So monster trucks, especially now, but it always kind of has been what I call a transient industry. And I see that in the brewing industry where I'm in now, is people have to move around to find the next opportunity that fits whatever their goals or ambitions or skill sets or just general mental health is, jumping around from place to place. And, I think it used to be maybe more frowned upon if you had to move around until you finally found your spot. In Dan's case, he not only found his spot, but I mean, he really carved himself out. I think I referenced it on Bottom Dead Center as sort of like a Mount Rushmore, face for Bigfoot for himself, well before he was done driving. He had already carved his place out on that mountain. But that old boy broke out the chisel and the hammer pretty early on in his career, I would say.
Well, me growing up in the 90s, I grew up watching the Pendant Point series, and I'm pretty sure, if my memory serves me correct, that Andy Brass retired at the end of 94 and yep. Dan took over. I think that's very interesting that, Runte through the formative years, getting his skills up, starting to get into the, started driving Bigfoot 8 and then getting into the other trucks, how well he took that mantle from Andy and just carried the team for the rest of his career. That also shows the kind of talent that Bob chose, to drive those trucks, because when you have the name Bigfoot on your door, that is one of those things where, hey, you gotta step up and perform, or else like you're out. Basically, that's from what I gathered from that time period.
So in my mind, there was two blocks of drivers, in the 80s that touched the early 90s, and from the early 90s to, the latter half of the 90s. And those guys were like a murderer's row of drivers. And in the 80s, that block was led by Kramer, certainly. And then I think, it was partially led by Andy, but in so many ways, it was also led by Dan in the 90s. And especially when you think about the 90s, I mean, at some point or another on the roster, you've got Andy Brass, Gene Patterson, Dan Runte, Eric Meager, Eric Tack. I mean, just that little short list right there. And certainly there was other cats driving. I'm not taking away from anybody. If I was driving in the 90s, we would have forgotten to mention my name there too, because why would you remember so many of the other people? And I don't say that disrespectfully, but I mean, gosh dang, you just rattled off, a big powerhouse, quad or whatever of drivers. So the fact is, Dan's not only trying to elevate himself just to be a good driver and just carry the Bigfoot name along, but he's, sort of, your biggest competition is your own teammate to some extent. And one thing that I, personally myself, I didn't get to do a lot at Bigfoot was race against my own teammates. Most of the time we were all off being our own Bigfoot truck somewhere else. With the case of the Penda series and so many like USHRA and USA shows where the Bigfoot trucks were at the very least a pair, if not a trio, Dan got to race against the very best his team had to offer in addition to himself. So, that sharpens that knife even more so. And, as Dan's coming up as a driver, Dennis Anderson is already an experienced driver in Gravedigger. Tom Mintz is coming up as a new monster truck driver, more than capable of coming right out of the gate and beating people. David Morris with Equalizer, Dan Patrick with Samson. I mean, you just keep rattling, Gary Porter. I mean, you just keep rattling those names off, and you're like, man, if I was going to do like an all-time monster truck racing video game, these are some of the names that I would stack as, characters or trucks I had to unlock because they kicked so much ass. And Dan was, so Cheech, I don't even claim to know the hierarchy of Hall Brothers chassis right now. And I think I've even lost track of the tail end of the Bigfoot hierarchy of chassis. But what I can tell you, well, stay with us, Dan. Take my hand if you want to talk. But I think that, you go from, you've got maybe less than a year in Bigfoot 2, and then you've got maybe a year and change in Bigfoot 7, and then you're in Bigfoot 8 for 92 into 93, and then you take over the reins of 14 not long after that. So those are pretty big leaps in technology. I mean, he went from stage 2 to, I guess you'd say like a stage, 1.5 Bigfoot 2 was, stage 1.5 to a full on stage 2 to an early stage 3 to like the most, modern thing on the shelf with 14. And he did that in a 4-year period. So, I mean, that is a rushed, example of how to get somebody from a crew guy learning to crush cars to a world champion. That's a pretty incredible, accelerated pace of learning. It just shows how talented he was. He could keep up with that.
Well, and you also look at the talent that Bigfoot had when he joined, Gene, Andy, Jim Kramer, like so many drivers of that era helped shape Dan into the driver that he became. And I feel like if Andy kept racing after the 94 season and Dan was racing at the same time, those two would have been so tight in point standings and just how like they would have had their own rivalry inside of Bigfoot with how competitive those two men seemed.
I definitely think it was already there, or certainly headed that way, and I think Andy was very self-confident. I mean, obviously he must have been self-confident. He was, pretty convinced that he was going to step out of monster trucks as a multi-time champion driver and then go, succeed in the then new NASCAR Craftsman Truck Series. And all of us that are NASCAR fans know, unfortunately, that didn't quite work out maybe the way Andy wanted. So, I mean, there was no lack of confidence sitting in the seat of 11. Obviously, Dan's running really well. And, Meager was pretty fun to watch. I mean, now this is retrospectively, of course, because as a kid, like we were watching this stuff on TV, we weren't, breaking this stuff down show by show or year by year like we are now. But I mean, you could see some of the early mistakes in places that Andy and Dan were able to, beat Meager with little things he would maybe not be as good at. And then by 95, 96, Meager was well and truly caught up on all of that too. So not taking anything away from Dan, what I'm saying is, Meager had a lot of the hallmarks too to be, damn near as good as Dan and Andy. And I think a lot of that comes from, how good Dan and Andy were. They inevitably rub some of that off on folks. So, I mean, the lineage of drivers that Dan stepped into the Bigfoot seat in the shoes of, the path of, I mean, holy cow, like that's a lot of pressure, but I mean, that's a really cool lineage to follow as well.
Well, you look at, I think it was the 96 season where Eric for the first half drove the Hulkster truck, and then for the last half of the year he drove the Stinger truck. You look at how close those two were always in final rounds. I was watching, like when I do design work, I just put some random monster truck stuff on, and I saw a video that was Dan Runte's, seasons in the Penda series. And when I got to the 96 era, I'm just like, wow, like Eric was holding his own against Dan at a lot of those events.
Yeah, certainly. I mean, those guys had pretty much equal equipment. 14 and 15, probably, two of the most similar trucks in the fleet, certainly at that time, I would say. And those guys were very, very talented, and they were not going up against, inferior competition or anything like that. We talked about this on a BDC episode where I wish we had more footage available to us of so much of the 90s era US hot rod stuff that was never televised. So basically, what would it be like? You had Monster Wars in 93, but Bigfoot only made one appearance on there. So, I mean, really, you got to say 90, 92, 93 until, 98. And I mean, those guys were going up against, again, some of those same, serious high level competitors, and not always winning either. I mean, if you can find show results from, I'm just pulling one out, but say the Silver Dome show number 2 in 1996 or something. It's not like it's 1988 where generally Bigfoot kind of wins everything at those big shows. Everybody's punching at or above their weight, and everybody's taking punches to the gut and the face. And, you're getting bloodied every weekend trying to come out of these things with any kind of a win. And so I have to imagine that after a first quarter of running some pretty intensely competitive US hot rod and occasional USA shows, you come into the Penda series. And in some cases, it might have been like a little bit of a, okay, I'm not in a dome. I'm not running turning courses or different kinds of things every week. This is like hammer down. It's all about tuning the truck, reaction time, finite details, let's say, rather than, just trying to hustle your way through a tough turn 4 or 5 times to get a win in that night. Now, I'm not minimizing the difficulty of what they did with Penda or anything like that. It's just a whole different discipline. And Team Bigfoot just proved, I think, time and time again, their attention to detail and the repeatability their drivers could bring to the starting line. And Dan, obviously, at the front of that, was such a key to their, repeated success year over year in those series.
Well, we're going to get back to our chat in a minute, but we're going to play a video from former Bigfoot driver Christian Norman. He sent in a video to us, and we're about to play right now. So just stay tuned, everybody.
Hey, guys. Here we are, huh? Cheech, Brad, thanks for putting this together. This is pretty cool that you guys are putting all this together. Mindy and Jesse and everybody at Bigfoot, my heart absolutely goes out to you guys and gals. I miss you guys, love y'all, and I just want to say I'm there in spirit with you guys. So, but how can you put the life, career, legacy, and condense it into 2 minutes? You just can't. We've all seen the amazing things he's done in a Bigfoot truck. But what really stood out to me, getting to know him, getting to have the privilege and the honor of the time that I had with him at Bigfoot during my tenure there, was how much he cared, and how much he gave a damn about you as a human being and your well-being, and your health and your happiness. Even during when things are tough, the first quarter blues, wintertime, or the dog days of summer, he was always there till everybody was good to go. He would run circles around all of us. I mean, his work ethic was incredible, but his knowledge and his ability to convey what he knows and what he's experienced and to inject it into you as a driver, into your head, it was pretty remarkable. The way he drove a truck, he was like a symphony, man. And basically he would tell us, hey, here's what you should do, and man, you would do it, and it was like, wow, he made you a better person, he made you a better driver, made you a better mechanic, the whole 9 yards. He just made everything better. He was the beating heart of Bigfoot. I'll miss him. I'll miss his laugh. I'll miss his huge smile. I can see it right now. I can hear his laugh in my head. You can hear it from a mile away. So many things can be said, but we all love you, Dan. I miss you. I'll always miss you, Dan. Thank you for all the good times. We all love you. Thank you, Dan Runte.
And that was Christian Storm and Norman. Cheech, you're back. You've been having some technical issues tonight, it seems.
Phones are acting up, so I don't have earphones as of right now, so I do apologize.
Yeah, you sound kind of robotic-y, but hey, we'll make it work. We've been talking about, Dan's impact in the 90s in the Pendant Point series. And, one thing, Kyle, that you said, the kind of the Mount Rushmore of Bigfoot drivers. And, they're definitely Andy's up there, Dan's up there, Jim Kramer's up there. I'd put Eric Meager up there because how he did in especially in the 90s. But what do you guys think? Who do you think is the ideal Bigfoot Mount Rushmore of drivers?
You go first, Dan, while we have you on here.
Obviously, I think Jim Kramer, because he kind of got the ball handed to him in an early stage. If I sound like I'm robotic, I'm sorry. But I say I guess so. So Jim Kramer. I would say Andy Brass. I would say Dan Runte and Gene Patterson.
Yeah, I'd put Gene up there for me instead of Eric Meager. What about you, Katie?
If I can only pick 4, so I'm somewhat consistent with the real Mount Rushmore. I mean, you have to say Bob Chandler, Jim Kramer, then I think Andy Brass and Dan Runte. And then if somebody lets me do something wildly illegal with a national monument, I'm putting Meager on there. And I mean, Bob's driving, I have some strong opinions about Bob's driving that are not negative. His driving was part of what, got the whole show running, let's say. But it wasn't necessarily remarkable like what Kramer did. And I'm not trying to catch heat for that. I would think he would probably agree as well too, but he was doing it before pretty much anybody else was. Certainly within the Bigfoot organization, he was doing it, before anybody else. So, he has a place on that Mount Rushmore, in my opinion. And then obviously, I kind of feel like everybody after that's, pretty self-explanatory.
I like that comment that California Monster Trucks on YouTube says, I think the Mount Rushmore is carved out of Bob Stone, so he's the foundation of it. I like that. That actually, that in my head, that makes sense. Chris Marmanis says, you can't catch heat for the truth. So,
I beg to differ.
Another thing that Dan kind of made himself known for was the stunts that he did while his tenure at Bigfoot. The trailer jumps, the world record jumps. We're doing this episode, back in 2012 on this day, Dan did the jump at the Indianapolis State Fairgrounds for the 4-wheel jamboree. Last
Thursday was the anniversary of him doing the Empire airplane jump on September 11th, 1999.
Yep. 747 jump that he became well known for. I've always wondered, what his mentality going into stuff like that was, because, you look in monster trucks, nobody was really doing a lot of world record stuff at that time, not doing a lot of these big jumps and, the daring stunts. I wonder like what led Dan to be like, you know what, let's try it. Let's do this.
I mean, I'm just taking a swing here, but I think you started seeing those things become a little more prolific and amped up a lot bigger and taken a lot more seriously by the team after, the SRO Pace, US Hot Rod, whatever split. Right. So, I mean, when Bigfoot's not in Monster Jam, and I'm not claiming that it was like a play for airtime or any kind of desperation or anything. I'm not implying that at all. More what I'm saying is, that's marketing, right? You're trying to find ways to, not just stay relevant. I don't mean that. I think Bigfoot was still very relevant, but showcase your relevance to new and current audiences and fans, and try and still get your truck and your messaging and your sponsors messaging out there to consumers. It would not surprise me if a half hour special about Bigfoot jumping a tractor trailer in Las Vegas might have got more ratings than multiple episodes of a Monster Jam broadcast, let's say, and certainly might touch, different demographics in different households and things like that. So, I mean, when you look at it, it's pretty clever in my mind. The flip side to that is the preparation and the expenditure in both, time and energy and manpower, I guess, if you want to separate that from energy, but a lot of stuff has to go into that. They weren't half baking these things. They didn't build a giant big dirt hill, park something somewhat obstructive in front of it, and then just launch the truck off at, whatever it was going to reach in a certain gear ratio. They put a lot into that stuff. And when I was at Bigfoot, gosh dang, I know Dan led the charge for us doing the ADRL, American Drag Racing League, 8th mile passes down the drag strip with Bigfoot. And in the 8th mile, he wasn't setting necessarily world land speed records for a monster truck, but he was up in the 80s. I made two passes, I think, and I was in like the low 70s in Bigfoot 10. So Dan was, way up there in the mile an hour with his truck. And just to repeatedly do things that, like, for some monster truck teams is kind of okay, we're going to try this and see what happens, which is fine. But Dan did it so many times. So, like, you almost add that to the stunt list, because if you could imagine a monster truck wiping out at 85 miles an hour in a drag strip, that's a pretty horrific crash, in my imagination. And then in 2012, right? 2012, because it was yesterday or today was the anniversary, I guess, of, the big jump in Indy. And that was incredible to be part of the team and be there for that. I had wildly underestimated as a young fan the pressure you felt as one of Dan's coworkers and teammates for the team as a whole to succeed, and for Dan to succeed and the truck to work. And you show everybody, like, Bigfoot hasn't had a new style chassis design since, Bigfoot 16, which was kind of a relic from the 90s in its design. And then with concussion, you come out with 18, and Dan is so, competitive in it. And he's just got this really awesome piece. And then to go out and send the thing off, such a small ramp, and to be such a well thought out, execution of that jump. And he was so cool through it all. I was actually looking for my photos from that day, because I want to say I was up in a man lift. I think Bob Chandler and I might have been up in a man lift, or we were elevated somehow to take our photos of that, I remember. And what an incredible sight that was, man. Like, do you look through the viewfinder and get the best photos you've ever taken of a Bigfoot truck in your life, or do you just stand there in awe and watch the master at work? That was tough. But I can remember more of what my eyes saw than what my camera shutter saw. So I guess I did that part kind of right. But anyhow, to your point, doing these stunts, I think there's a lot of levels to it. But at the end of the day, you're just trying to show people how badass your truck is and what an effective marketing tool it is, and just how damn good, the best driver in the world at the time could be.
Dan, what are your I can't even speak. What are some of your favorite memories of, like, the stunts and kind of stuff that Dan did in that era of being more of a daredevil, it seemed at the time?
Well, I didn't know about the airplane jump until Bigfoot started posting it on these things called QuickTime videos.
Oh yeah.
And I remember the UPN stuff, about the, him jumping over the tractor trailer, and then also the 7 cars after that, and then Monster Trucks 2000. But and then you seeing all the chrome illusion paint scheme and stuff like that. But for me, um, actually the first stunt video I did was my dad paid the money for pay-per-view so we could watch the Thrill Show on, with Mike Joy and Kyle
Stunt
Petty,
Mania.
Stunt Mania, and I watched that, so I knew a little bit of the high jump and stuff, um, and then another thing is my dad always ordered we had the Bigfoot team videos like 93, 94, 95. And back in the United States High Ride days, one of the first shows of the year, they would be at the Houston Astrodome, and they would have these jump offs or jumping competitions. And Runte was in it with the racer foot and body, because I think, or maybe it was in the fall, but Lonnie Chodros was driving Power's Bigfoot for that indie show. That's when the transmission went to take a dump. But just him doing what he does and just thrilling the crowd. I also remember back in, it was 02, 01, 02, when he tried to jump over the baseball wall over there in somewhere in the
Aruba, I believe.
Aruba, and basically destroyed the truck, but they got running. But that was another thing. And then another stunt that people may not recognize was a Bloomsburg when he jumped over fast tracks and snakebite, or is it Bigfoot 1 snakebite?
I think it was 1
Um,
and 8 is snakebite.
okay, and he jumped over that. There was a bunch of stuff that they were going. It's it was pretty cool seeing that he's been doing it for a long time. I remember he did a pretty good jump at a air show or somewhere like that in Phoenix or Arizona. They did some exhibition stuff there too. But um, for Dan just being that way, it must be some type of water or genes that this age group is, because you have Tom doing stunts, Dennis did the wall stunt. Mark just likes to drive really, really, really fast. And then you got Dan, jumping stuff. So, I mean, I don't know what type of water that these guys are drinking, but they seem like they love to do some stunts.
One thing that I wanted to bring up that Dan mentioned, and it is my guilty pleasure, Monster Trucks 2000, the new Thrillennium. Don't come at me. I love that event, okay? Even though how cheesy and how corny it is, I love it because of that. Because that was a time when WWF SmackDown was right coming out, and they wanted to capitalize on the car crash TV. But Dan's performance in that, I will always love. Just, you could tell he didn't give two shits about it, but he just went along with it.
That I was so incensed by that show back then, and I still have strong opinions about it. They've probably mellowed a little bit as I've gone along, but I just remember being so disappointed because Dan was, I went from Jim Kramer to Andy Brass to Dan Runte. That was my, trifecta of current favorite Bigfoot driver, and I just wanted so badly. I don't know what was, so obviously that was 2000, so whatever I was, like 15, 16 years old. I so badly just wanted to see Dan go out and blow the doors off everybody. And I didn't want to see it scripted for him to do that. But then, like the ladies hanging on his arm and stuff like that. I mean, we can be less PG on Bottom Dead Center. I'll keep it PG here tonight. But there was probably, wisps of truth woven throughout some of that show. But, I you could tell, Brad, like you said, I mean, you could tell he wasn't like super stoked about the plot line stuff and all that, and the Big Daddy and Itty Bitty or whatever the hell those guys were called. Yeah, Mini Me. So, but 14 looked glorious when it came out in the Chrome Illusion body, because they did, the big body switch. And I'm just opening myself up for all of the hate tonight. But I don't like wrestling. I don't dislike it. I'm not anti-wrestling. I just don't like it. Never cared for it. It's not my thing. I've never watched an episode of, as I like to call it, Brian Manson, I think, called it wrestling for the longest time. just not my thing. So for me, none of the, what do you guys have? Like, who was the heel? Somebody on there was the heel, right? Who would you call that?
I don't know who would be the heel,
wasn't it?
Monster
No, I
Patrol,
thought Dr. Bones and Scorpion were supposed to be the bad guy trucks,
which
right?
was actually Gene
Yeah.
Patterson and Rick Petroline.
In the most Gene Patterson, God, I love Gene. Gene, if you're listening, I love you, buddy. The most Gene Patterson thing he could have done was just firewalled. What was it, 11 that he wadded up? Just firewalled that sucker and cashed her out when he wasn't supposed to do that. And that's sort of like, in my mind, that's real monster trucks fighting back against scripted bullshit. Is just, no matter how hard you try and script it, reality's gonna life finds a way.
After that era, Pro MT started up, starting to get back to the real racing stuff, and Dan still was dominant at some of those events. There is some footage out there of the Pro MT stuff, like in your video that you put up in Memory Dan Runte. There's some really cool footage from that era in that video, especially from like Bristol, Nazareth, Darlington, like a lot of these NASCAR tracks that they went to. He's still like, Dan was still giving it his all. And that's what I love. Like, it didn't matter if it was, a small fair show, Pro MT, Penda, Toughest. Dan ran like his life. It was like his last show ever. Like, he wanted to give the fans every single ounce of himself in that truck.
Yeah, totally. I mean, he was still going to be the consummate professional, especially behind the wheel, and I guess at the year 2000, at that point, I mean, if you're Bigfoot, maybe if somebody comes knocking on the door at that point and they're like, we have a TV show idea, and you almost want to say, well, yes, before you even ask a whole lot more. And it's, again, you're just trying to continue to broadcast your relevancy to everybody and staying front of mind with people and that sort of thing. And that's a whole nother episode to go down about, how does Bigfoot survive post 1998, right? That's a whole nother episode. But Dan, what a, scrambled brains that leaves you with a little bit in the year 2000. Pro MT's firing off, and you're like, oh man, this is going to be even more serious than the Penda days. And also Monster Trucks 2000 is happening. And I remember on the Monster Zone, discussion areas, there was a lot of, heat flying back and forth between fans and other people in the industry, kind of throwing shade back and forth at Bigfoot. And, some of the other teams that were booked or invited to be a part of that. Some of them were what I would call Pro MT teams, like Mark and Tim were there with Executioner, that sort of thing. But then you had like Paul Schaefer there with Monster Patrol, which I don't think Paul ever really got into any of the Pro MT stuff. So kind of a diverse mix of, truck characters there. And I don't know what degree they really knew about what was supposed to happen. I mean, I can only imagine Tim and Mark, the looks on their faces watching that night unfold. But at the end of the night, Dan's still Dan. And obviously that event didn't change him in any way in a negative sense. I mean, he came out of that still, I felt like, with, his class and dignity intact, because, he didn't act like he was some big shot because he had, been the hero of some scripted TV show or something like that. He was still just Dan and went out and kept doing what he was doing. And, I think that stuff was out of our mind, for the most part, pretty shortly after that, when things just kind of got back to racing.
Dan, what do you remember about, watching stuff of Dan around, the post 98 era, going into the Pro MT stuff?
Well, for me, I didn't get a really chance around the West Virginia, Pittsburgh area, kind of. We don't get really a lot of chances to see Bigfoot. A lot of times back pre 98, so let's say, 97, 98, we would normally get Eric Tack and ET, they would say, but we would see him a lot with Bigfoot 11 at this, like the Mellon Arena and Three River Stadium and stuff like that. I didn't know Canfield was so close. We just knew Pittsburgh and Wheeling. But anyway, post, I would only see like truckworld.com, stuff like that with Bigfoot, because I never really got a chance to see a lot of it. All I would normally see is Monster Jam on TNN. So I got, back then I was kind of like more of a Monster Jam kid because that was the only product I would normally see. Until UPN had a couple of the stuff with Bigfoot, like Monster X 2000 and stuff like that. But and then I was following the, Pro MT was supposed to be like what's going on, so I was following that on Truck World, and I always thought there was like, kind of like two different groups of trucks. Um, yeah, even though Monster Patrol did both, you had your Goldbergs and Gravediggers and Gunslingers, Sudden Impact, stuff like that. But on the other side, you would have Bigfoot, the Hall brothers, Paul Schaefer. Uh, you know, um, you had your mix between John C. Sacco jump back and forth, but you have those teams, Nightmare, then Big Dog, those guys on that other side. So I was kind of following in my head when I was a little kid. It was like kind of two different divisions. One freestyle esque, you know, don't take it seriously, but then you had the other group that took it seriously. The Pro MT Championship, the four wheel drive, you know. Thunder Drag Championship. You had all that going on, and I always thought like it was different seasons, I guess. Like the Monster Jam was only in the wintertime, and then after Monster Jam's over with, okay, I'll follow these guys. So when I was young, when I was younger, I try to bounce back and forth, but I really didn't get a lot of Bigfoot coverage like I would love to have, uh, because where I live, it was pretty much dominated by Monster Jam.
Another thing I wanted to get into before we go to our next tribute video, which is from Dustin Parks, amazing photographer in the industry, great guy. But some of the paint schemes, the liveries that Dan drove were some of the most iconic in the business. Especially with Bigfoot, he started out in, probably just a plain normal blue Bigfoot, ran the racer stripe scheme. One of the best was the Power Wheels Bigfoot, in my opinion. But what were some of your guys' favorite schemes that Dan ran during his time, as a driver?
All right, racer stripes always win, right?
Yes, agreed.
I mean, big blue, old blue, whatever you want to call it, all blue, that's untouchable. That's in a whole nother class of itself. So set that aside. It's not a livery. It is its own thing unto itself. Racer stripes always win. If you want to go lightning round top three, it's racer stripes, Power Wheels, blue Summit body. That would probably be my top three there to make sure I spread it around a little bit.
That one?
Yep, that one. But I'm also stupidly sentimental about that paint job. I mean, I don't, even shop with someone or anything necessarily. But what's cool about it is the first Bigfoot body that had my name on it was painted identical to Dan's truck at the time. And it was that blue Summit paint job. And shout out Nick Dvorak was our painter at Bigfoot at the time. And, Nick kicked butt on all those paint jobs that he was asked to do back then. And a lot of them in very short notice. And so, yeah, that paint job had a lot more depth and detail to it than maybe people think. And I loved combining, elements of the Summit paint job as you might have seen it in other forms of racing, plus putting that Bigfoot touch on there. I think the only thing it would have been improved by was, a classic Bigfoot font rather than kind of the weird aerodynamic font, whatever you want to call that script that was used on there. But I'm not knocking it. And yeah, racer first, and then, Power Wheels was one. I mean, if people thought Wildfoot was a big departure from traditional Bigfoot, paint jobs, then Power Wheels pretty much kicked the door wide open on that and did it very well.
What about you, Cheech? What are some of your favorite paint schemes / liveries that Dan ran?
Okay, so I guess I could. It's all right for me to just do a light top three, or should I do a top five?
Do top. Kyle, you did top three, so let's keep it with the top three.
Okay, so like you said, the traditional old school blue out of the window, and then for me would be number one would be pink and teal, the '97 F250 Bigfoot body. Was the first time I ever saw Bigfoot run there. I really started refocusing on that, and I thought that was pretty neat. The second one is the Chrome Illusion 2. Not the first one, like he ran with the 97 body. The 99 body, but the one after that, the one with the flames on the side that he ran a lot for Pro MT and all that stuff. And the third one is a Summit body, but it's not that blue Summit body. It's the dark blue with the same type of graphics that was on the white body, but the blue one.
Okay,
So
that's
not
a
the one
solid.
that you have as a toy, but the blue version of the Summit body truck.
That's a good top three. My number one, pink and teal. For some reason, the combination of pink and teal on a paint scheme, I've been obsessed with those colors lately. I just think that is just a classic looking Bigfoot, personally. Number two, I'll go with the Autism Speaks, just all blue with the LED lighting. As someone that is on the autism spectrum, I thought it was amazing that Bigfoot would partner up with Autism Speaks and help promote and the cause of autism, and just support that. And number three, Cyclone. I still love that body to this day. It was the first Bigfoot body I seen. Keith Sturgeon ran it. We went over that a couple episodes ago when we had Kyle on as our main guest. But Dan ran that at the very last time a Bigfoot truck ever did anything with USHRA at the 400th centennial. I love that scheme. I'm weird. I think it's very underrated. Bigfoot needs to bring it back, even with that body style. Please, it'll make this weird Canadian very happy. but yeah, all-time number one has to be pink and teal. It was a classic scheme. It kind of went along with the Bigfoot Cruiser when you've seen the red and yellow go into the pink and teal, and it made it so much cooler at that time, especially with that body style. But guys, we're gonna play another tribute video with our buddy Dustin Parks, and then we have another one that we'll be playing at some point.
Hey, Brad. I just need a couple more seconds from you on this body discussion before we get to the next tribute video.
Okay.
I, as someone who considers himself to be reasonably knowledgeable about Bigfoot history, I don't know what this pink and teal body is that you're talking about. Now, I do know what the 97 Lightning Bolt body is. Now, pink and teal seem to be the color that grown women's underwear comes in, based on what I've observed through the glass windows of a certain store at the local mall. But I believe Lightning Bolt should be the preferred nomenclature for that body. So, all right.
Okay, I was just going off of the colors on the side.
I know.
Yeah, same here.
The Lightning Bolt scheme.
Yep, 97 Lightning Bolt. That's what I'm going with. But anyways, I'll take the flack for that. But better get to that video.
All right, so this video is from Dustin Parks, and then we have one from Dan's bosses, the Hall brothers, and then
I really like to talk about the rivalry between Dan and Mark before we play that video, though.
Yeah, and then our final video of the night is going to be from none other than Gene Patterson, and that'll end off the episode because it is a long one. But here's our video from Mr. Dustin Parks.
I don't know if you can really describe what Dan Runte means in this business more than what has already been said. But what people seem to forget is that outside of this industry, he was just one of us. We could go on and tell stories about once a show was done, the jokes that he would talk about, the fun that he would have. Some of the nights whenever he had one too many and then the party really began. But I think for me, what I remember the most is actually last year at Bigfoot Open House. I happened to see him walking up, and it was my first open house in all these years. He saw me, shook my hand, and he goes, I wonder whenever you were going to get your crazy butt out here. And it's those things where he literally remembers who you are. And that's something that is hard to come by. Jeff Jarrett once said that in this business, you have an awful lot of acquaintances, but very few friends. And that's true. Because Dan was a friend to everybody. And I think this is going to hurt a long time because it feels like I lost a family member. So, Dan, hope you and Lurch are enjoying that view from up in the sky. We'll take it from here.
And thank you to Mr. Dustin Parks for that video. You know, the next kind of era of Dan I want to get into is the toughest stuff, because Dan and the toughest monster truck tour, you know, especially, you know, closer to when Dan retired from driving, he was synonymous with that tour, you know, multiple time champion, you know, that he was the star of that tour, you know. Talk about a little bit about, you know, Dan and the toughest tour, because he dominated that series.
I'm sad I didn't get to see him on that series more than what I did. I only got to see him, oh gosh, man, just a couple times in Loveland, I want to say. I don't even know if we made it to Casper while he was driving. You know, Matt Looker, one of my co-hosts on Bottom Dead Center, obviously works, you know, really closely with the toughest crowd, and he had some great, you know, insight that I'll kind of attempt to reconvey here. But what he was, you know, the most effusive about in his praise of Dan's driving on toughest is, you know, Dan was coming in there with a pretty long wheelbase truck. You know, Bigfoot trucks didn't have lockers in them in the ZFs and things like that. So some of the things that maybe the more conventional trucks had a little bit of an edge on Dan mechanically with, you know, Dan made up for with a truck that almost landed too good, almost worked too well. I mean, you know, 18 and 21, I want to say, right, were the kind of the last two that Dan drove on those tours. And I was just astonished at how well, you know, like 21 worked. I mean, a lengthy machine, but certainly a very supple and capable one. And even at the twilight of his career, Dan was going out and winning so much on what is, in my very biased opinion, probably the hardest arena level tour in monster trucks to win any kind of meaningful championship in, be it an overall victory for the night, or, you know, the top over the course of a weekend, or, you know, if you dare dream of it, you know, a season championship. So what Brian Manson has built, you know, with what grew out of Monster Nation and into Toughest Monster Trucks Tour, I mean, Dan was one of those guys that was built to go out and use every drop of experience he had, but also almost get like a little riled up with some aggression at what these younger guys or newer guys were doing with their trucks, and then just making sure he was stepping up accordingly to continue to represent the Bigfoot name correctly. I mean, that was really always what it was with him was, you know, he is so much of what the Bigfoot name is. It was very personal, I think, for him to go out there and live up to that level.
Cheech, what about you? Any, you know, thoughts of when Dan ran the toughest tour?
Dominance. I mean, enough said. I mean, with the competition that he had, I mean, yeah, you had Derek Anson and Heavy Hitter and Tailgater and occasionally Hawkins and Equalizer, and then later on, kind of towards his end of his tender before he like retired, you had Aaron Kane and Quad Chaos and stuff like that, and the different changes throughout. But every single time Dan was at that arena, it was just pure dominance, and I you know, it was just cool, and also wasn't chaos. It was controlled chaos. Like he drove the truck so technical that sometimes today's standards you're missing that.
You know, and you know, Dan running the toughest tour, you other names like Jamie Garner, you know, he ran up against Jamie when Jamie was just starting out in the industry. And, you know, Kyle, you're completely right. You know, the toughest tour is the toughest arena tour in monster trucks, you know, with the tracks that they put, you know, just everything that Brian Manson and the toughest tour has put out, you know, from the lineups to everything that they've done. It's incredible to see, you know, the growth of that. And Dan was an integral part of that. You know, some of my favorite Dan Runte freestyle moments have happened in the toughest tour. You know, Dan, no matter what, he always drove that truck at 100%. And you're also right. You know, those trucks like 18 and 21, those were some long trucks. Like he had to equipment, he had to get around that track, very skillfully in those trucks. And, when Dan retired, I believe it was Larry Swim that took over, that time. But I would have loved to see, and this is just me spitballing, the whiskey's hitting a little bit, I'm not gonna lie. Imagine if Dan drove the CRD, which I believe was 19, I believe was the CRD chassis. I wonder how he would have fared in that chassis in the toughest era.
I don't know. I mean, I never got to drive 18. I made a joke in BDC on our Dan Runte episode that I was several too many girth units wide to fit in Dan Runte's seat. So it would have been quite the seat change operation for me to fill in for him. But I filled in for Larry, which if I can, just let me throw a quick shout out to Larry. Larry, buddy, Larry's not somebody that we've stayed in touch necessarily over the years or anything like that. I would never say we were exceptionally close, but I do want to, say to Larry that my heart absolutely aches for you, man, because I know, the friendship and the camaraderie that you and Dan enjoyed so much over the years. And that was, very visible to all of us in the team, what a pair you guys were and just how damn funny you guys were together and how damn good you guys were together. But you know what, Larry, and I want to say Dan as well, they pinch hit for me a little bit when we were, awaiting the birth of our first daughter when I was still with the team, and she came extremely premature, emergency delivery, all that stuff. And those cats stepped in and, made sure I didn't have to be in California or New York or something, when my wife gave birth. And so I took a couple gigs for Larry in 19, a few weeks after my daughter had been born and stabilized and everything. And they were just car crush gigs. And I was, shocked at, compared to 14, just how incredibly supple that truck was. It felt so different. Now, I think with a lot of the changes Bigfoot made to that truck to quote unquote make it a Bigfoot truck, probably altered the way it handled and reacted and felt compared to the way it was conventionally designed to operate, let's just say as a Monster Jam truck, right? So I don't know. I mean, I'm sure he could have gone out and done just fine in it. But there's something about 18 and 21, just those being a little bit more organic Bigfoot builds. I feel like those were much more tailored to Dan somehow. I could be totally off base on that. Obviously, we'll unfortunately never know. But I think, Dan was just very well suited for what the team's truck program evolved into with 18 and 21.
And you heard it here first, everybody. Aldo referred to a monster truck as supple.
Supple.
I've never heard that word related to a monster truck in my life. That is
well.
amazing.
Let me tell you this. I wrote so at Bigfoot at the time we had like a after event worksheet we would fill out with notes about did something break, what were the conditions. It was all a brilliant idea. I've never seen a team keep track of paperwork and details like Bigfoot does, and credit to them for that. But I just remember I was getting beat up really bad by 14 that summer at the shows I was doing, and I drove 19, and I drove it like a sissy pants the first time I crushed cars with it because I didn't realize I wasn't hitting things hard enough. Like in 14, it would have been enough, and it was not enough. In 19, I remember Brian Bertoletti telling me, like, is that all you're doing to do, dude? Like, you need to hit it harder. And I'm like, yes, always one for subtlety. Thank you, Brian. So I had to step my game up. And then when I ran it, I think in Kentucky or something like the next weekend or a couple weeks later, I had to hit stuff. I was hitting stuff a lot harder than what I would have done in that situation with 14. And the truck was just, oh my God, it worked so well. Like the guys had it really dialed in. I mean, Brian had a great set of shocks he had built on it. And, they'd figured out some geometry to work with the ZF axles and the four links and all that stuff. And it worked great. And I wrote on my worksheet when I got back, I want whatever shocks 19 has, please take the leaf springs out of 14. So that's funny to laugh about now. It probably didn't land very well with the powers that be back in the day, and I'll own that mistake. But it was a whole nother ball game, that truck was.
Now, next thing I want to talk about and ask you guys is, what is one of your favorite race moments of Dan? It could be from the Penda series. It could be from the toughest. I have a video queued up of my favorite. And you guys are probably going to guess what it is. And I'm going to keep us in here while we watch it.
Okay.
Clash of the Titans. Him versus Jimmy Cretin. Dan, I feel like the best chassis Dan ever had, in my opinion, was him in 16. Those, I just felt like they were so just connected, you know, like, especially with the retro foot body at the time. Like, one of my favorite looks, you know, that Dan ever drove. But it's such a classic race. So we'll play it here.
While this is going on, I say my favorite race would probably be with I'm watching this and everything that's going on here. Was the I think it was the Monster Truck Challenge, or was it the was it MLMT? It was at Gateway Motorsports in St. Louis, and he just won that race hands down. I thought that was probably one of my favorite races that he was part of. Was some of the Rich Schaefer stuff.
So a thought about this RMR race, and I can't pick a single Dan Runte win that I like more than another, you know, when it comes to some of his all-time greats. But Brad, you picked a hell of a race here, and I'll throw my 2 cents in on this. But what makes this race a little bit better than the one a couple years later when Cretin and Dan face off, and Dan's in 18, and I think Cretin's in perhaps an upgraded version of his truck, is the fact that, you know, Dan is in a bit of a dinosaur of a truck compared to Cretin's there. Now, not by a whole ton or anything like that, and I'm not dogging on 16, but Cheech's point is spot on. Dan was like one with that truck. Well, you got to figure he's been driving that style of truck for Bigfoot now since 1994 when he got 14. So I mean, man, the seat time he has with a truck like that, and you can tell. I would be hard pressed to think there's any other Bigfoot driver in history that could have taken 16 and run like that with Cretin. And I mean, Cretin was around the peak of his, you know, awesomeness at the time, I would say. Not saying that he's less awesome now per se. It's just everybody slows down with age a little bit, or everybody gets a little less sharp with age, or is willing to run not quite as hard sometimes with age, or whatever. Those two guys were both set to kill right there. And Dan's probably the only guy ever that could take 16 and just run. I don't want to say effortlessly, but he does make it look pretty effortless. I mean, you look at his run versus Cretin, Dan is, you know, maybe on the inside he's riled up and panicking a little bit when he's behind here, or, you know, cuts a turn really tight there or whatever. But as far as from the outside goes, he's running what looks to be a very calm, cool, and collected race. I mean, he is cucumber cold during that race compared to Cretin. You know, and Cretin's driving style certainly a little more wide open, a little splashier and ragged edge. But then it also speaks to the differences in the trucks, right? Anybody that's driven a, you know, what I would call a legacy Bigfoot truck now at this point with the ZFs and the wet brakes and all that kind of stuff, and especially if you've driven a conventional monster truck with pinion brakes and 106s and things like that, it is a whole different animal. It's a totally different machine in so many respects. And so Dan is working with something that's really its own beast right there, and is a bit of an anachronism in its own way. And he's still extremely competitive with that unit, and not only keeping up with Cretin, but forcing Cretin into some minor mistakes, or forcing him to, you know, burn up his brakes. And the 2-lap finals at the end of those, you know, Clash of the Titan shows, that is a powerful test of man and equipment at that point, because you've already made whatever it was 3 or 4 passes if you've made it to the finals, and now you got to make 2 laps. And, you know, you're cooking your brakes if you've got a pinion brake truck at that point. And I'm sure the hubs were plenty hot on 16, but having essentially oil cooled brakes in the hubs at the wheels of 16 gave Dan, you know, a mechanical advantage there too. And so sometimes people might want to poo-poo a Bigfoot truck with ZF axles, you know, because this or that, it doesn't have a locker or whatever other mechanical aspects they don't, you know, think is advantageous about it. You got to admit right there, I mean, in a 60-0 braking test at the end of that run, Bigfoot would have vastly outperformed Bounty Hunter. So, you know, Dan was running an endurance race, and he kind of had Jimmy on his back heels for most of that race. And that just shows that Dan did not buckle under pressure in times like that when everything was firing for him.
Well, and then, in your memory, in your tribute video to Dan, you played both races simultaneously, which
Yeah.
I didn't know that they, had a rematch all these years later when Dan was in 18. And both races are pretty much identical in a way,
Yes.
which is crazy because I don't know how many year difference from one event to the other was.
2 years. It was
2
2
years.
It was 2010 to 2012. And I assume Cretan was either in a newer truck or an upgraded truck, or, I don't know enough about his truck's lineage. But to your point with Bigfoot, I mean, now Dan's in 18, totally different truck than what 16 was. That was his first year in 18, if I'm not mistaken, 2012, right? Do I have that right?
So.
In any event, not nearly as much time in that truck as, seat time in the type of truck that 16 was. And he goes out and is running. I mean, you saw an acceleration difference off the line, I think, with 16 over 18, but Dan quickly makes that up. And then for the rest of the race, I mean, they are almost carbon copies of each other, except Dan is driving literally 2 totally different stages of a Bigfoot truck. I mean, we're at a stage 3.5, at least with 18 compared to what 16 was. And what a brilliant job he did. I mean, if you'd have taken those 2 Bigfoot runs, clip out Bounty Hunter, get somebody that actually knows how to do video editing like Colby instead of a jackass like me with the stuff I'm trying to do, and put those trucks side by side racing each other out there, and you've got a barn burner of a final right there too. That is incredibly impressive to me. It's like watching a guy, go around a road course in a sports car, and he's got a 1967 Ford GT40 and he's got a 2016 Ford GT, and he's running a lap time a 10th different. That is incredible.
Well, and it also kind of makes you think if, Bigfoot stick with USHRA and went through all these years of doing the Monster Jam World Finals in Vegas and all these stadium tours throughout the years, where Dan would have kind of lined up in that era of, Speed Channel Monster Jam. I think Dan would have been right up there, with Tom and Dennis and Jimmy in that era. Like, what's your guys' opinions on that? Just bench racing a little bit.
Are you still on, Cheech?
Yeah, I'm just listening.
Okay. You better take the reins from me, or I'll just commandeer the podcast. So
hey, we're just having fun. We're just having fun shooting the shit.
I'm just patiently waiting for me to get kicked out again. So that's the reason why I wasn't really even talking.
You're getting kicked out. It's a very dark club that you're in right now, sir.
Yeah, for some reason at the beginning of the episode, it kept kicking Cheech out, and I'm not sure why. StreamYard's never done that before.
First of all, if Runte was still into, we wouldn't have Blue Thunder. We all know why Blue Thunder was around. But I think Runte would have, the racing would be wonderful. And the freestyle would be good too. I think he would be more like on the side of like Scott Hartsock. Scott was really known as a racer, and he did put on some good freestyles, but he was the one that was always biting on Tom's ankles when it came to racing. And I thought maybe Dan would probably be that representative. If Bigfoot was with SRO, you would probably have a lot of shows where he would be headlining a lot of the smaller arenas, but he would probably be at some of the bigger arenas like Anaheim, St. Louis, obviously, Detroit, Houston. Would be facing, it would be those 3, Tom, Dan, and Dennis, versing each other all over the place with your, Sea Sox, Hard Sox, and the normal people that you would normally see. I just think, me personally, I think if he was with SRO in those time periods, I think, the his driving ability is great as it is, but the freestyle game, the pushing the trucks a lot more than what he would normally do. I think also the technology of the trucks would accelerate a lot more than building a new truck in 2012. I think you would have a new truck back in probably 03, 04. with probably with the help of Patrick and stuff like that. But equipment he was in, and I don't think I think he would gave everyone a runs for their money.
So if I could throw my thoughts in on there, I think you have to look at such a bigger picture take than just was Dan good enough to go be good at those shows, because the talent's certainly there, right? So just set that aside. There's zero argument about did Dan Rennie possess the ability to evolve and stay competitive with some of that stuff? I think that's a given.
Yeah.
Now, if you just assume that Monster Jam is a production, so we're talking track design, freestyle obstacles, everything else about it, level of driver risk taking and things like that, just assume all of that follows the same trend that it has through history, because we got to simplify this a little bit. So all that stays the same. We're just trying to decide, could Bigfoot have existed with Dan Runte in that timeline? And yes, I think it could have to a point, but Cheech has a great point that Bigfoot's operation from a technical perspective would have had to have evolved on a radically different path than what it has proven to. And so we would have seen something like Bigfoot 18 in some different form well earlier. I mean, probably a decade earlier than when it actually came out. I mean, frankly, it was overdue when it arrived. So it would have needed to come a lot earlier for the sake of Dan. He's proven his resilience and his toughness over the years, but I also believe that the shelf life for a driver of his age, circa 2002, let's say, when I think you could start to say Monster Jam started to get pretty freaking rowdy around that time frame, that shelf life probably begins to grow a little bit shorter than what it ultimately ended up being for him, because, the intensity of the shows and the size of the jumps, and was the truck keeping up with, the technical demands. So yeah, Bigfoot would have definitely had to step up its technical game. I still think a bigger focus would have been placed on winning races and less on, being an equal to Max D or Gravedigger in freestyle or something like that. And I personally, as a fan, would have been super stoked about some kind of balance like that. And, there's the argument, well, how would, Bigfoot's an independent operation, well smaller than the Monster Jam fleet. How would they have continued to, keep up with the wear and tear and the trashing of vehicles and building new stuff? And I think as long as it was allowed to, wink, wink, if you know, as long as it was allowed to, the natural course of sponsorship involvement with the Bigfoot organization would have helped sustain them, I think, in a healthy enough way that they could have kept, putting the effort in the material and the advances and things like that out there. Obviously, that's not how it all went down, and it's hard to say, what or where Bigfoot would be now at this point. I think in some ways it would have been great for the brand. I think in other ways we got to enjoy Dan Runte to ourselves, let's say, outside of Monster Jam. We got to enjoy Dan Runte in his career a lot longer than maybe what we would have in Monster Jam. So we'll never really know. But I don't go to concerts in big stadiums. The bands I like don't play those big stadiums. The bands I do like play smaller arenas and halls or small festivals or cool shit like that. And so sometimes it's almost cooler that, in my mind, Dan Runte was, everywhere else that he was, and not always at the Astrodome or the Metrodome or things like that. So it is what it is. I'm not knocking either side. I think you have to look at it from such a 30,000 foot view rather than just, is Dan and Bigfoot good enough to win at World Finals? I mean, I'm sure there'd be wins in there here and there, but you just never know.
You definitely, hit the nail on the head. And, if, Bigfoot would have stepped up, in sponsorship and getting a new truck, I have no doubt in my mind that Dan would be a multi-time World Finals champion in racing. Like, I could just imagine, especially with Bigfoot running, I think they ran, what was it, Headman headers at that time. Just hearing that just distinct Bigfoot sound roaring down Thunder Alley coming into that turn, that would have been such just an epic scene to see. And I still think Dan would have kept his own in freestyle. If there's, and one thing I wanted to bring up, which kind of leads to this, if there's one thing Dan was known for, it's those damn slap wheelies. Like, that man could slap wheelie no matter what, no matter where, off of anything, just off of like a single car ramp. He would just slap that thing down and come right up. And it's ridiculous how good that man was at a freaking slap wheelie.
somebody out there is going to remember better than me. If it was 2003 when Dan took over in in Bigfoot 15, because ET had stopped driving after 2002, maybe it was either 2003 or 2004 at Bloomsburg, and I feel like that was one of Dan's first big shows, let's say in 15. And I think ET was there helping him kind of work on, the front shocks were a bit different on 15, and the whole truck probably felt a little bit different. And at the start of the weekend, I remember being in the Hall Brothers pits, because that's when I was a crew guy for them. And we were all just kind of shocked, like, what? Dan Runney's not doing slap wheelies very well in Bigfoot? What does the world come to? And then I feel like, okay, so Matt Stoltz is chiming in. So it was the fall of 03 when ET wrapped up. So it would have been 2004 at Blooms then, probably, when the 15 incident I'm referring to was. And then by the midway through the weekend, not even the end of the weekend, he had that sucker figured right back out, and it was just business as usual for him again. I've repeatedly joked that he could slap wheelie on his transport tires off the ramps pulling into the trailer if he wanted to, and not even scratch the hood. That guy, he had a level of finesse that, so many of us that have ever driven would wish we could just tap into a small amount of that.
Cheech, what do you remember about, Runte and the slap wheelies? Because I'm weird. I don't like moonwalks, cool and all, but slap wheelies and sky wheelies, just do it, man.
Well, most of the highlight videos I normally see with Dan throughout the Monster Blog and whatnot had involved slap wheelies. I mean, the trucks helped out a lot, but Dan was pretty good at doing it. He had the record for the longest time, I think, at one time with 14. He had the slap wheelies and stuff like that. And then obviously in 2007 or 8, when we were at Wildwood, New Jersey, when he did the slap wheelie and then just stayed it on the back end of the truck. I thought that was pretty cool and stuff like that. And, that is the way he goes. I've really, it's just crazy that just too many things just to know about what Dan's slap wheelies and all that stuff. But the two that always caught my mind was the Wildwood and then the one that he always does of Bloomsburg.
Well, we're going to play one more video here, and then we'll wrap up our thoughts and everything about that. And then we'll get into our video with Gene. But this is from Cheech's bosses, Kyle's former bosses, Mark and Tim Hall of the Hall Brothers Racing Team.
Hey, Crush This asked us to say a few words about Dan Runte. We ran with him probably as much as anybody did over the years. I don't know how many places we raced in and how many times we raced each other. No idea who won more or less.
No, it doesn't matter. But I think I don't think I raced anybody else more than him.
I think that's right. I'll bet you if the specs, if we'd have kept track of it, I'll bet you Mark and Dan raced more than any two guys in the history of the sport. I mean, they just raced time after time. I know me and Bob Chandler were talking about that one time, and he said, these guys, it seems like they're always racing each other, and and that sure is the case. And
I always thought it pretty cool, and I always thought too that while we were pretty fierce competitors and everything, we had a lot of mutual respect for one another, and I always thought that was cool. I mean, not something we ever talked about or anything like that, but I always thought that was neat that I think we had a lot of respect for one another, and I don't know, I always thought that was very special to me.
Never played games on the starting line when you raced him, when he raced us. If our truck wasn't 100%, we'd tell him. If theirs wasn't, he'd tell us, hey, look, don't, I can't go hard enough here because something's wrong. Don't tear yourself up. There was a lot of respect. Mm-hmm. And when we traveled internationally, if we went to some places, we had each other's back. That was always a part of it as well. And when you raced them, he always was absolutely first class. He brought everything to the table. He was going to run that thing as hard as it'd go. He always had it. He'd work, do whatever he had to do. to make sure that that truck was ready to race. And when he was a crew guy, you know, before he was even a driver.
I remember going back to the old, was that Meadowland Arena or whatever in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. I think it was the first time I ever met him. And we were there, and I think he was,
Crew guy for John Pine.
Yeah, I think he's a crew guy for John Pine. So that was pretty. I think that was the first time I met him, and that's going way back now. That's a long time ago.
Yeah, but that's you know, that was what we had. We had like I say, we had a lot of respect for him. It's really sad, you know, that well, I guess we're all getting old and stuff, but you know, now then to lose him in an accident, such a tragic accident, enjoying his Harley, you know, on his way to work. Wow, just. You just don't expect stuff like that, you know. And
Very tragic.
all the racing accidents and incidences and fires and, you know, all the things that you go through, and then you have something happen. I remember him and Matt running into each other in Indianapolis, and both guys get out of their truck, and the first thing each guy did was run to the other guy's truck to see if he was all right, you know. And so Dan gets to Matt gets to Dan, and neither guy's there because they're checking on the other guy. You know, that's the kind of guy he was. And you know, and then also it's horrible that we lost Joe. We lost Joe Nectar. The sport lost him, you know, not so long ago too. So
I always liked Joe. We had a lot of fun on the old.
Good dude.
Yeah.
You know. Did what he could with what he had, and man, he'd line you up and run you as hard as he could, and you know, he was always a good fella too.
A lot of fun in Monster Nationals, and then when you would see him at events, you know, like you see him at the Jamborees or whatever, you know, he'd always come out with a big smile and always had a good time. Joe was a good guy. I miss him too.
So it's horrible that we've lost a couple of guys here just so you know, just so recently, but. Guess that tells you life's short. Enjoy the races.
Yeah.
And I'm sorry, Cheech. I forgot you wanted to mention about the rivalry. I am so sorry, dude. My brain is just weird
It's a
tonight.
very, very, very important time period. I think that a lot of people may not know is the races between Mark Hall and Dan Runte, Bigfoot, Raminator / Executioner. You know, even though back in the day, you know, Executioner was always the little brother towards Bigfoot. You know, no matter what event Bigfoot was at, Executioner was there because of the not the rivalry, but the likeness to each other. You know, Bigfoot knew that Executioner, the Hall Brothers Racing, would be there with their trucks and still put on a good show when they do shows and stuff like that. With the stories I've heard, but when you have that happening. 2000, you see the Executioner truck starting to step up a little bit more. 2001, that wins its first championship, and then boom, the Ram deal, the Dodge deal. Now you have Ford versus Dodge, Mark and Dan, but they race each other all the time. And that was one thing I liked having Kyle here, because you've seen both sides of the coin, unlike and for you, Kyle, would you agree that even though it's a friendly rivalry between, but in racing it is your Jimmy Johnson, Carl Edwards race, Jeff Gordon, Dale Earnhardt type deal, for you being there in the trenches and learning about these two guys, kind of agree that them two were like peanut butter and jelly?
Yes, absolutely. I'd agree. I held it together till the very end of bottom dead center last week, and then I kind of cracked up a little bit emotionally, and I was doing good tonight. And then hearing Mark and Tim talk, if you could turn words into money right now, you would take every penny you just made off that Hall Brothers tribute and take it to the effing bank, because what those guys said couldn't be more honest and true and heartfelt. They're emotional guys, but they're not like me, sappy, wear my heart on my sleeve emotional. And to hear them say such great things about Dan is amazing. But holy cow, guys, I remember being 18, 19 years old, working for those guys in 2003, 2004, and they were saying the same things to us as employees of the team. I remember standing at the starting line with Tim at 100 different races, and him saying something like, boy, can you imagine how many times? No, there's not two guys that have raced each other more than those two guys. I'm convinced of it. You know what I mean? Um, he had a great saying. Sorry for the language, but I love this saying, and thank you for it, Tim. I say it all the time still today. Tim would say something like, I'll shit my hat if those two guys haven't raced the most of any two monster truck drivers. And he was right. And coming out of high school as a, diehard Bigfoot fan my whole life, and when I was in high school going to shows, getting the behind the scenes access as a credentialed member of the media, Dan knew I was there because I wanted to learn about, how to be a part of the industry in an operational sense. He's the first person that taught me to put tires on a monster truck. First person that taught me the right way to clean the damn body off on the truck and make it look right without scratching stuff up, and letter the tires nicely and put your stuff away in the hauler when you're done tiring up. So Dan was my idol. And then I come to work at the Hall Brothers, and they were people I knew and I liked, and that was my opportunity. But I certainly didn't know enough even about them to idolize them like I did Dan. So then it was very weird, almost just weeks apart from a show in Pocatello, Idaho, crewing for Dan. And then, we're 8 weeks later and I'm a paid employee at Hall Brothers working against Dan at Bloomsburg or something. That was crazy stuff for me. And to see the level of competitiveness that the Hall Brothers brought to the table, especially when Dan was on track, that's because it wasn't because they did not like Dan. It wasn't because they didn't like or respect Bigfoot or Bob Chandler. It's because, like you said, Cheech, they had tried to emulate so many of the correct things that Bigfoot had done right over the years to build itself up into the championship organization it was. They were trying to follow some of that blueprint and add in drawings of their own, let's say, to build their team and company up into a championship operation. And, if when Raminator won the 2002 Pro MT championship, if anyone in the world wants to say that Dodge had the biggest hand in them winning that championship, I would argue against that. I would say Dodge had the third biggest hand in them winning that championship. The first would be Mark and Tim's pure determination and attention to detail. The second would be the competitive challenge from Dan Runte that he was the sharpening stone that they honed their knife against for so many years of, getting first beat up by Bigfoot and then taken out later in the rounds by Bigfoot and then getting squeaked past by Bigfoot and then finally starting to equalize with Bigfoot and then finally surpassing Bigfoot. So it's no disrespect to Dodge or Ram or, whatever you care to call them now, but I think they were the third ingredient on that ingredient list. So got off on a bit of a tangent there, but I'm pretty effing passionate about, how successful those boys in Champaign have been, but also about, what they said about Dan, I think was just absolutely spot on. Got me fired up.
Well, you look at the, jamborees at that time, and Bigfoot and the Halls were your two staple trucks of that series. And you knew every single time when there was any foot truck versus any Hall Brother truck, it was going to be an all out drag out war. Cheech has always said, I forget who he gets the quote from, but if you line up against somebody, bring your lunchbox. And that's the truth. It was always like, no matter what series, wherever it was, when Hall Brothers and Bigfoot lined up, you were going to see one hell of a show. And I loved watching a lot of those ESPN Speed World episodes of the Jambos because, you'd see some of those races. And I love the fact that, in this generation we live in with YouTube, we can go back and relive those moments because that is such a awesome era. I wish I could have, been at some of those shows when those two were going up against each other. It was just amazing.
Truly the saddest part about that era is it was under so much of monster trucks from the mid 90s until the mid 2000s was underdocumented. I mean, for every race that you've seen Dan and Mark have on some kind of television half-hour special episode, folks like myself were treated to tens, if not hundreds more of them. And they were just absolutely, spectacular. And that shows the respect Dan had for him too. And I'm going to have to jump off here myself pretty soon, but I do want to watch Gene's video. So I'm going to hang on for that. But what I kind of want to, leave with here, and I just have to say, my heart goes out to everybody at the Bigfoot organization.
Yes,
certainly, Mindy and Jesse and all of Dan's closest, friends and family. It still just doesn't seem real. And if there's one comforting thing through all of this, and it's cold comfort, I guess, because of how bad everybody's hurting on different levels. But what a way to be remembered. What a shining example of how to conduct yourself over your career in any industry, in the way he did in our industry. And when Monster Jam hits the presses and
Yes.
acknowledges something involving a Bigfoot employee, and I'm saying this very positively, that is certainly saying something there, because that's sort of breaking like the fourth wall or whatever, right? So just the outpouring of unconditional support and love and respect for Dan, and care for him, and the family and the friends and the organization that he's left behind. And all of us fans have each other. Justin Mosinger said it best: we've all got our blue lights ready to hold up in the air and salute Dan when we're all feeling a little bit down. So kind of want to leave it at that, but also want to say, kind of to Mark and Tim's point, as fierce of competitors as they could be, I was also very fortunate to be a part of. Sometimes we'd be at an event when it was just us and Bigfoot, whether we were there to do an exhibition or special events booked those two trucks to match race at a non-monster truck event or something like that, and you got to see a whole different side of those two operations. Tim was not out there setting the motor to kill, hoping that we were going to sneak past Bigfoot in the finals, and Dan wasn't out there stressing that he didn't have a lot of crew help and it was going to be him against this mountain of Dodge horsepower. We were out there looking after each other, helping each other back into our pit stalls. Or do you need me to throw some fuel in that? I know I have thrown fuel in a Bigfoot truck while wearing a Raminator crew shirt. Like, those guys had been up and down the road and across the world with each other so stinking much for so many years that they looked after each other so damn well. And that's a fitting and a touching tribute from Tim and Mark to Dan. So, I'll shut up and butt out now, but I sure appreciate you guys, let me stop by and try and fill some kind of void on your show. And I hope some small part I've been able to help give voice to so many of the people that Dan touched their lives.
Again,
Thank you for taking your time also, Kyle. And,
yes.
I know you was going to do it last week, but, I just didn't, like I said when I told you on Messenger, it just didn't feel right. I felt like I was rushing it, and I felt like there's some time to comfort and everything like that. And having you on, being, being, knowing Dan and the insights and everything like that is really, really helped out. And thank you.
New text message from Tim Hall.
This,
Speaking of Tim, but I also
thank
want
you.
to say again, Kyle, thank you as well.
Certainly.
If you guys want to check out some cool old school monster truck stuff and listen to a podcast that talks about the old school stuff, go check out Kyle with OSMT, the Bottom Dead Center podcast with. And you shouted out Matt Looker. Matt was there when I fell over the Dashers here in Grand Prairie, so he probably has a fun. I'd love to hear his side of that. I've always wanted to. But before we get into the video from the legend Gene Patterson, Cheech, any final words on what Dan meant to you as a fan and just whatever?
I lost a childhood, one piece of my childhood. I'm always reflecting the sitting in the living room watching Trucks and Tractor Power, getting ready to go to Pittsburgh and watching, Inside Monster Jam. Just thinking back and winning the hero card from Dan on Monster Truck Radio, and the questionnaire, then meeting him in person. I someone pointed out, and it's kind of interesting. He's like, I'm gonna make a Merle, and it's hard for me to leave spaces out, but you see, Bill Weaver and Rambo playing for keeps on the line, Scott Hartsock and Gunslinger with Dan Rente and Bigfoot with Ron Bachman behind crewing for him, or something like that nature. And you see the trucks just lined up and getting ready for a big show up in heaven. What happened is just as a fan, a void that's not going to be ever matched up. And 2025 doesn't really help anything matter helping when one of your favorite rock stars passed away, one of your favorite wrestlers passed away, and then one of your favorite Bigfoot drivers. It's like the 80s and 90s is just gone. And And but Dan was one of the most friendliest people I ever met, one of the heartfelt people, one that will talk to you forever, and he will be missed. And I also want to say too, um, Tim mentioned it, Joe Nichter.
Yes.
It's weird. It's not weird, but it's crazy how his battle, his fought. He was a good man. He welcomed me visiting when I visit the Freedom Hall for in Kentucky for a show. I get a text message from Macy, and she goes, "My dad wants you to come over." I'm like, "Okay." Hung out with them, watched when he first came out with the pure adrenalized truck, which is the Renegade One monster truck. And then seeing his Ford Bronco that he always took at the four-wheel drive jamborees, and just such a nice person. I met him when he was working for, I think he was doing stuff for the Holmans, and I think he was either bouncing off a Star Marshal or he was running um, the Stealth Hummer truck. But uh, two genuine people, the two guys that would have bigger size hearts than they are body wise physically. Um, just a hard pill to swallow that you know time doesn't wait for anyone. And but for that, that was my kind of last memory with Dan, and wanted to show some love for Joe also.
For me, and I'll make this kind of short and sweet. I wish I got to meet the man, Dan Runte. He gave me so many memories as a young child. I still watch a lot of Penda to this day, and I crushes me on that. It almost feels like the same thing with John Forrest. I never got to see Forrest drive in person. I got to meet the man, but I wish I could have gotten to see Dan run in person and meet him, and also to Joe Nichter today. Actually, it's funny how today is a weird day for stuff. Back through, I think it was either 2 or 3 years ago when I was at the Jamboree. Today was the first time I met Joe in person, and just thinking about that and just the coincidence of it, and Joe,
Him giving you the gratefulness to also decorate and made the
yes,
truck that you have right now.
yeah, with the Stomper, and one of my favorite designs I've ever done. I hope at some point I can have there's Dalton in there in the chat. What up, Dalton? But there's so much we can say, but I think to end it out, we are going to have the most amazing man that I know in the industry, Mr. Gene Patterson, end us off.
I'm gonna do is I'm gonna exit out. I'm gonna watch it on Facebook. I'm here at the Oklahoma State Fair, and I got two of the hardest working crew guys around right now, just waiting for me to let go. So I'm gonna do that, and then we're gonna watch that. So once again, guys, see ya. Guest for next week, by the way, I don't know. There's a lot of stuff in my going flying around, and we'll get someone on. Hopefully Cam and Dan Dahlgren will be on. They messaged me. But good night. Thank you, Kyle. And
Thanks again.
Brad, knock it out of the park. Thank you again. And we've been having a lot of feedback. One more thing I want to say is you and Mike Nugent's episode was wonderful. We have a lot of people messaging about the mental health situation, bringing it up in the forefront. And we never took that lightly when you said talk to people. We're not joking around about that.
Nope.
That's always a big concern. It's okay to not be okay, and sometimes it's okay to not be Superman.
Yep. Exactly.
It's okay to be that way. But I'm gonna sign off. Brad, you're gonna take it from here.
Yep.
And take care. Thank you, Kyle, once again. And you do you.
Thanks, Cheech.
Again, Kyle, thank you so much for hopping on with us. It meant a lot to have you on, and maybe we can do a Bottom Dead Center / Crush This collab at some point and have some fun there. But guys, this is where we're gonna end off. We're gonna let the video play, but check up on your friends and family, like Dan mentioned. Mental health, we take it very seriously on this podcast. September is Suicide Awareness Month. Me and Mike Nugent shared our stories a couple episodes back. If you want to check that out, please listen. And just check up on your friends and family, guys. And until next week, guys, keep the rubber side down and the shiny side up. And here is 15 minutes uninterrupted from Gene Patterson. Oh, I'm sorry about that, guys. I stepped away for a second. I am so sorry, guys. My wife got home and I had to go say hi to her. So give me a second, guys. I don't know why there's no audio. Let's see. The file was too big to upload it right on here. Shit. I am so sorry, guys. I feel bad about that. Okay. Take two. Can you guys hear it? Can you hear it now? Again, I'm so sorry about that, guys. I feel so bad. Why is that not playing any sound? Here, let me figure this out, guys, okay? I am so sorry, guys. I do not know what the issue is. Give me a moment. Gotta love technological stuff. Let's see. let's try this. Recommended, finish. Let's see if old Microsoft Media Player will be any better. Okay, let me let's see here. I am so sorry, guys. Okay, let's try this now. Let's see if this will work. Oh my goodness. I don't know. I do not know why the audio isn't working, guys. I'm actually kind of frustrated about this. Damn it. Why is the audio not working? Okay. Let's try this now. Again, guys, I am so freaking sorry. Please tell me it's working now.
Good afternoon, everybody. Gene Patterson coming here from my basement. I've been asked by Crush This podcast team.
Is it working? Please tell me.
About recent events. I really don't see me doing that, so I'm going to try to record some stuff here about the late great Dan Runte, and hopes that it makes it to the air. And
yes, it's working.
It's going to be a
okay.
Little bit
I'll play it from the beginning. I am
this.
so sorry, guys.
Sure
I am very sorry.
There's a lot more people out there that feel the same way.
I'm so sorry. I'm going to play it from right from the beginning. I'm so sorry, guys. Please forgive me. I don't know what the issue was. Here we go.
Good afternoon, everybody. Gene Patterson coming here from my basement. I've been asked by Crush This podcast team to come on and talk about recent events. I really don't see me doing that, so I'm going to try to record some stuff here about the late great Dan Runte, and hopes that it makes it to the air. And it's going to be a little bit for me to get over this, and I'm sure there's a lot more people out there that feel the same way. Dan was guys,
I'm sorry. I'm trying.
going to be a little bit for
Okay, I'm sorry. I'll introduce you.